Welcome to another episode of Get Wisdom. I'm Brian Kelly, along with Get Wisdom founder and director Carl Mollison. Carl, this week's topic is the hidden cause of mass shootings. What makes people go on a shooting spree that will likely end their own life?
Yes, it's of topical interest, and it's of consistent interest, or should be, because it's a chronic problem. It was only a few years ago, there was a news story and analysis that pointed out there was a mass shooting involving 4 or more victims somewhere in the U.S. every day, each and every day. And
Yes.
That hasn't changed. It just keeps rolling. And in fact, I just heard on the news a couple days ago, there has been one mass shooting over the past year in Baltimore alone, Baltimore, Maryland. So
Sure.
This is a widespread problem, and we need to really come to grips with this. So we're going to
Indeed.
do our best.
Let's get right into it. Carl, you asked Creator, what percentage of mass shootings are caused by spirit meddler manipulation of the shooters?
All right, and this is quite interesting. As a channeler of Creator, I get feedback from the divine perspective on all sorts of issues. The good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, the troubling, and the enlightening. And this is a hidden scourge people are still unaware of, even though it's been talked about all through the ages, the problem of dark spirits infesting people and corrupting them. And this is what Creator says. Virtually all criminality and acts of terrorism and violence, particularly on the scale of mass shootings, often involving innocent victims and done for no logical reason, are the direct influence of spirit meddler attachments within the person, inciting violence to begin with and egging them on to do the deed. As you know, one of the consequences of long-term spirit infestation is mental illness in a percentage of victims. What then commences and worsens, when that commences and worsens, this can result in someone with true delusional thinking of their own. And they may take up and embrace a prior suggestion to lean towards violence as a means of working through grievances and other emotional turmoil they may be experiencing. This is why possession of long-standing can be so tragic in its consequences. The lesson here is that doing spirit removal and cleansing for people, starting from infancy, would reap many long-term benefits because it would greatly reduce random acts of violence and other wrongdoing that is the product of spirit manipulation. And this includes many lives with careers failing, relationships ended, marriages resulting in divorce, and much general unhappiness from lifelong inner torment by the bullying spirits that bring this to their host. This approach, applied systematically, would result in a dramatic reduction in serious mental illness across the board.
So we wasted absolutely no time in going straight to the answer to the question that the show was based on. What is the hidden cause behind mass shooting? The answer is negative spirit attachments and manipulation.
It's a corruption. And there are other issues as well, and we're going to lay it all out on the table.
All right, well, let's get on with that. You asked Creator, what percent of mass shootings and other acts of terrorism are influenced by extraterrestrial consciousness as opposed to just dark spirit manipulation, commandeering and directing the actions to carry them out?
And Creator answers, this is fully 50% of all such crimes, big and small, occurring worldwide. Because such behavior is illogical and felt naturally to be attributable to mental derangement, whether or not there is a formal psychiatric diagnosis, the authorities will look no deeper for explanations and often will end the investigation right there if there are no obvious connections to an organization involved in such undertakings because of political extremism and so forth. If this is a lone wolf, so to speak, who is apprehended or killed in the act of an unfolding tragedy, They will be assumed to have become unbalanced and gave into dark impulses impossible for the normal person to fully comprehend, as mental illness is a mystery to this day, even to the medical establishment. But all know the signs, symptoms, and consequences that can happen when people become out of control, acting on dark inner thoughts and delusions that distort their thinking and may seek drastic action to serve their inner compulsions. This is so frequent as to be commonplace and receives little afterthought at this point because people are so accustomed to this happening, they simply accept there are significant numbers of demented people in the populace, so one can simply expect this to happen. This further reinforces the conclusion that the only defense is to take away as many weapons as possible because nothing can truly be done to affect human thinking and mental health, particularly when people do not seek treatment, and identifying them comes too late to take any kind of preventive action. So you can add this to the long list of crimes committed by the Extraterrestrial Alliance to create trouble in human society and drag everyone down because of it.
So just so everybody's clear, these mass shootings are 100% involve dark spirit attachments and manipulation, but 50% involve the addition of extraterrestrial influence and manipulation.
Yes, they're trying to worsen our world, and they do a quite fine job at that. So they soften people up by employing these dark spirits, directing them, commandeering them, giving them instructions as to what outcomes they want. And in people who may have some past history, maybe in another lifetime, maybe they were involved as a soldier and are accustomed to killing in their history, or they're unbalanced in just the right way and prone to taking violent action. Those people are the ones that just don't become mentally unbalanced and perhaps bother no one. They become unbalanced and then seek a victim to act against. And that is an orchestration to bring that about.
Indeed. You ask Creator, what percentage of the subliminal mind control manipulation being done by the Extraterrestrial Alliance is being used to promote human aggressive behavior?
This is a quite interesting answer, and it speaks to the way that mind control manipulation is done for everyone across the board. Creator says this is variable from individual to individual. The typical orchestration is to provide dual messages that appeal to both sides of an argument or contention or political ideology. Depending on the leanings of the person in their thoughts and beliefs, they will be recoiling from an aggressive message, intending to ramp up passion and feel threatened, which can cause them to take defensive measures and support a cause aligned with that. Or will have a ramping up of their emotions accordingly, and this can trigger them to take more drastic action than would otherwise be the case. For example, to join a protest march or a gathering, to heckle or harass political opponents. So the response will be in keeping with the individual character of the target and could go in widely different directions. This is the true cleverness of their approach, that they can influence almost everyone to some degree in one way or another, because the aim is to create discord and chaos. Whatever the individual response might be, it will end up serving them and their agenda because it drives a wedge in between people and creates warring factions and induces people to act on their inner response to the messages. And it is that action that can become excessive, and they may get caught up in a drama that ends in violence. So on average, approximately half of people will tilt towards the more aggressive response to the programming, and the other half will recoil with dismay and then seek shelter, in a sense, and feel vulnerable and weak, and will be motivated to take some kind of political action in opposition to the more aggressive stance they dislike. This keeps people at odds with one another and greatly increases suspicion and dislike of differing views in others, and causes people to dismiss, reject, and actively hate people who they truly do not know, but who self-identify with a particular agenda, and in the process wear the label intended by the extraterrestrial alliance to side with a warring faction. And then they're caught up in the drama and contribute to the mayhem directly. So they are aiding and abetting the darkness, acting covertly to stir up the trouble in the first place.
That is just a fascinating answer. We could spend the next 20 minutes talking about it. We don't have 20 minutes, but it's interesting that it says half is like one side, half's on the other, and we see that with the history of American elections for like the last century even. It's like, how can these elections come to be, when you're talking millions of people involved, it gets down to a few thousand votes is the difference. It's just mind-boggling, but the manipulation certainly explains it.
Yes, and you see the signs in the level of intensity and the passion that often is irrational.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no basis in reality for many of the complaints and the mudslinging and the name calling. It's breathtaking, and this truly explains it. It's not rational. It is not a conscious awareness, even what the people are doing.
Right.
They're acting on inner programming that has been instilled into them. So this is the same as the mass shooters. It's just they're using their own response to the programming of a milder nature, and maybe just indulge in name calling and just
fairness,
general hatred.
Benign, but
they take out their hatred on social media, rather than shooting up a Walmart or something. Yeah.
Right. You asked Creator, what was the reason for the two mass shootings that left 50 dead and 50 wounded at two mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand?
Okay, so we started out this century with the war on terror and blaming radical Muslim fundamentalists for acts of violence and so forth. And, having become so numbed into accepting just the random mass shootings as part of the landscape, but not a conspiracy. Now we have mass shootings and mass killings of all kinds, and it's done for all kinds of motivations. And that's what happens when you ramp up hatreds. It's whatever the person's tendency might be within. That was what gets expressed, and that determines the target. So here you have an anti-Muslim mass shooting in two places. And Creator says about this, the mass shootings at the two mosques in New Zealand is very much a manifestation of the same phenomenon, using political and religious differences and as an excuse to conduct a criminal act of violence to seemingly right the wrongs perpetrated by the target in bringing a negative consequence to the country of the person's origin, or in alignment with their own inner hatreds and grudges instilled in them through mind control manipulation. These seeds that are planted in this way can easily blossom into a burning desire to take action, because this is what is drummed into the mind again and again and again, to incite violence whenever possible and create the greatest degree of hatred in a desire to harm others, acting on those hate-filled impulses. Someone who is inclined to violence, has experience with firearms, and is easily manipulable will be a prime candidate for these direst of actions. So it is very much akin to the mechanisms behind desecration of religious edifices and their iconic figures. It is simply taking it to a greater extreme and personalizing it to cause death and injury of a group who the shooter deems as causing a severe problem in need of their brand of solution. This is inculcated with mind manipulation as well. It is not a creative act that is unilateral except in rare circumstances. This is almost always a direct manipulation, targeting the person again and again and working on their inner resistance and caution to bring them to carry out an action guaranteed to change their life for the worst, if not end in their death as well. This will only end with the healing of the interlopers, so that in the absence of an ongoing propaganda campaign, people can begin to recover their senses, and healing outreach is done to undo the programming of beliefs and allow people to heal their way back to a true equilibrium where differences among people are considered minor and unimportant. They are just basic information not requiring an emotional response, and certainly not a negative reaction that justifies discrimination or physical violence to be unleashed. I did ask Creator about the number one answer by society, whether stricter gun control is the answer for the problem of mass shootings. And Creator told me, and this is Creator's words, this is a human-level solution to a problem with much deeper origins. The availability of guns does facilitate mass shootings by definition, but eradication of firearms is not practical in the current cultural climate, nor is this advisable under the current circumstances, when people may need to have home defense. On its face, this is clearly a problem of having too many individuals with corrupted thinking. That is the true problem. Guns do not turn people into mass shooters. Would-be mass shooters are primed to use their affinity for guns as the method of choice to wreak havoc on society. In the absence of firearms, they would turn to other measures. This has been true all through history. There are many ways to kill, many ways to destroy infrastructure that puts people at risk and leads to mayhem. There can be orchestration of group violence to create greater harm when powerful enough weapons become scarce. You will never be free of this scourge until people understand corruption, where it comes from, and how to prevent it. This you can do with the Lightworker Healing Protocol, and if that were in enough hands, this problem would disappear.
Well, that's an amazing answer. You know, I talking to my sister recently, and she was saying, we have to get rid of the guns because people shouldn't have the means to kill so many people so quickly. And while that's an interesting point, you can kill a lot of people in a few seconds with a truck, which people have done. So
yes.
It's truly not the answer. You know, it is a problem, of course, but just to think that this is a mass silver bullet that's going to get rid of the problem, that's just not accurate.
Yeah. You know, it's like a lot of things. If they're outlawed, it's supplied by an underground criminal cabal to provide it to people truly motivated to get things like illicit substances of all kinds. And that's true in countries with gun control. They still have some problems with smuggled weapons.
Absolutely. And there's billions of firearms in the world, so you'll never be able to collect them all. That's just not going to happen. Carl, we're coming up on our break. Be sure to check out getwisdom.com. You can get our prayer book at getwisdom.com/prayer to give you the means to do a very effective praying. Also, check out Creator Speaks at getwisdom.com/creator. And we'll be right back with this discussion right after this. Welcome back to the second segment of Get Wisdom. We are talking about mass shootings. And in this segment, the mass shooters themselves are going to speak. Interesting, Carl. Let's get on with this exercise. The Parkland school shooter, Nicholas Cruz, in a recently released video of his confession, spoke at length about a supposed demon voice inside his head that encouraged him to hurt other people and cut himself. Cruz said he had been hearing a voice or demons speaking to him for years, right up until that morning and the night before. He claimed it started after his dad died when he was little, and that it had gotten worse since his mom died in November, 3 months before the shooting. He described it as the voice of a young man about his age speaking inside his head. Burn, kill, destroy, he said the evil voice told him. It also told him to buy a gun and hurt people. What truly caused this?
All right, this is a question I pre-recorded and played, and this is what Creator spoke through me in answer. As you know from your intuitive assessment at the time, this was a two-pronged effort on the part of the Extraterrestrial Alliance and the Spirit Meddlers working in collaboration to focus this boy's inner turmoil and his prior infestation with the Dark Spirit Meddler attachments to a specific endpoint, being a mass shooting. The Extraterrestrial Alliance, in particular, through their own extraterrestrial spirits who command the spirit meddlers, look avidly for targets of opportunity amongst troubled people to find those with a suitable profile, which may include a history of criminality, prior gun use, and familiarity, and being prone to violence is an outlet for their impulses. And will cultivate these individuals through their spirit attachments to plant suggestions and give encouragement to bringing them along more and more towards the idea of attacking strangers and in a particular fashion. All the signs of this handiwork are present within him, and his awareness of the voice within egging him on, which included specific instructions. This, as you know, is a typical scenario and highly effective to cause mass shootings and mass killings through other means and susceptible perpetrators, targeted through inner corruption to break the law in this way, even though it will mean the end of their own life for all practical purposes, with or without the death penalty. They will not be allowed back into society in all likelihood. This, too, has the hallmark of manipulated conduct when done with no regard to their own safety or even in the willingness to die in order to carry out the act. This is quite bizarre and is the reason why it is readily assumed to be strictly mental illness, the product of a delusional mind. After all, killing strangers accomplishes nothing, not even the settling of a score. It is simply inflicting harm on innocent victims and has no logical basis.
You know, it's amazing. People do dismiss this as just a product of a delusional mind, but what the heck is that?
Yes.
People, when they're deluded, are reporting actually hearing voices, audio voices.
Yes.
It's not their own thoughts that they're doing. This is actually something impinging upon them. And yet people just don't pay attention to that kind of thing. And what are these voices saying? You know, these are critical issues.
Yes. Well, I've worked with many, many, many people and removed dark spirits from them. I had a client one time who told me that she had conversations with an angel that was in her. And so I asked her, well, what is the angel telling you? And she told me, well, right now he's telling me I should set myself on fire. Okay, so she thought this was, angel talk.
Right.
This is a corruption of awareness and thinking. And the amazing thing I found in doing a spirit releasement for her was she had a spirit of a deceased human who had been an arsonist that was attached to her. That's what was talking to her in her mind. And he was wanting to create his usual source of thrills by having her do a self-immolation. This is people have no idea. There can be reality underlying delusions that people hold.
Absolutely. People need to really look at this.
All right, so let's do a focus on some mass shooters who were killed in the act, who I channeled as earthbound spirits, because they typically become earthbound. They don't go off to heaven and get a big reward like a lot of them are programmed to believe. But I've worked on a lot of these to help get them back to the light. They deserve and they need to be rescued. So we have some recordings, some transcripts of sessions I've done for a whole bunch of these folks. I have a series of questions that I asked, pre-recorded, and then I play the recording, and record the channeled answer that comes through me from the spirit of the perpetrator. So this is what you're going to hear next.
All right. Tashfeen Malik and her husband were the two perpetrators of a terrorist attack in San Bernardino, California on December 2nd, 2015. In the attack, they killed 14 people and injured 22 others. Both died in a shootout with police later that same day. I'm going to read the question as if I am Carl asking the question, and then Carl will answer the question as if the spirit is answering it. Please, so pretend I'm Carl asking the question. Please help me to help you by telling me, what is it that bothers you the most? What is your worst fear?
My daughter. Where is my daughter? Help my daughter.
What is it you remember about the past you most want help with? What is it?
We did the killings. We did what we were instructed to do, but now we've been abandoned. I don't know where my husband is. I don't know where my daughter is. I don't know where my family is. I have nothing and no one now. This was not what it was supposed to be.
What can we do to help you? What would you like to see happen to help you feel better?
Help me find my way. Either send me back or take me to Allah. This is no place at all. This is an empty place.
What was your part in making this happen? Did you do anything you shouldn't have?
I did only what I was commanded to do by the will of Allah. I was a good soldier, and I was as strong as a man in carrying out my duty.
Why did you kill?
I was told to kill. The killing was an instrument. Killing was a means to get ahead, to show the world that life is empty without Allah, and material possessions are worthless. The only thing that matters is to be in the highest esteem of Allah, and to follow Allah as the highest calling. And those who would kill the infidels are pointing the way towards this truth. I was asked to create many examples to show the folly of modern life in America and to wake people up to the emptiness of their pursuits and to show a better way, the way of sacrifice and devotion to the cause of Allah.
Whose idea was it to kill?
His messengers came to us and taught us, and we did feel the touch of Allah and were able to share our visions with one another. And we were told the same thing. And we knew this was truth, because how could one person imagine and another person have the same imagining? We knew it was the holiest of truths coming through to us, and that we were chosen ones to carry out the task.
Is God on your side? Are you happy with God? And is God happy with you?
I am here in service to Allah, but I do not know where Allah is and why He has not raised me up. I am still waiting.
What are the conclusions you came to about life from having to take all that on?
I was born in the wrong time and place. I was given a way of seeing beyond the culture I was part of and to engage in something greater. And indeed, that is a glorious life, as I was able to be a martyr for Allah and to martyr others.
Wow, that's so fascinating. And the idea that you can indeed talk to deceased spirits before they transition to the light, and you can get an idea of what was in their mind at the time of their actions. This is incredible stuff.
And it's quite revealing, too. And the reason I chose this is not to pick on necessarily someone with this sort of motive. It's a hot button in many quarters. I'm fully aware of that. Don't hate me for it. But the reason was this particular exchange was especially intriguing because here was a husband and wife, and they were given the same messages in their mind by spirit attachments. And the messages matched. So this shows you, this isn't just someone becoming delusional and someone goes along with it because there may be a follower more than a leader. Or maybe they're both kind of unbalanced and they kind of buy into the same crazy idea and don't think it through. This is something going on in the interior of the mind that's paranormal. And it happened to both of them identically.
And they shared their stories with each other, and that became highly persuasive that they were indeed communing with God.
That was the convincer. That was the convincer.
Indeed. Let's go on to another example. Again, I'll be Carl reading the questions. The following was an interview with the earthbound spirit of a man who killed 7 people and then himself. So again, this is Carl asking the question. Please help me to help you by telling me, what is it that bothers you the most? What is your worst fear?
I am trapped somewhere. I don't know how to get out. I'm floating in the dark.
What is it you remember about the past you most want help with? What is it?
Killing. So much killing. I was looking for a reward, and now I'm in the dark. What happened?
What can we do to help you? What would you like to see happen to help you feel better?
Help me escape. Help me get the reward I was promised.
Who promised you a reward?
The watchers. The voice told me I would have riches beyond measure and happiness and power beyond measure if I did as they instructed me to do.
Who were they?
They just said they were with the power of all, the ultimate power.
What was your part in making this happen? Did you do anything you shouldn't have?
I did just what I was told to do and made the most of it.
Is God on your side? Are you happy with God? And is God happy with you?
God has nothing to do with this. There is no God. There is only me and the real power.
What are the conclusions you came to about life from having to take all that on?
Life is for experiencing misery and disappointment until you have a chance to get what's yours.
Well, that's another fascinating exchange. And what's particularly interesting is that this guy appears to be an atheist. So It's not just religion that can create the vulnerability here.
Yeah, there can be any kind of motive. It could be a race hatred. It could be a class, insult that they're trying to resolve a grievance about. It could be just something that they're told to do, and then they use the people around them as the most convenient targets. And then they may kill their entire family. And of course, this is considered, just that flavor. People become mentally unbalanced in all sorts of ways. So what's the big whoop here? Well, the big whoop is there is an inner instruction always to do this. And there's a certain rationale behind it that fits the person. And this is a pattern. This is a clear pattern. And remember that couple who got identical messages to help them become collaborators so the two of them could carry out the mayhem together with a full intent.
And I've done quite a bit of study on my own on mass shootings for the last decades. And pretty much a common thread through all of them is that the shooters report hearing voices or getting thoughts so powerful that they feel it's not their thought. Yeah. That they are getting this messaging, these instructions from some outside source.
Yeah, and of course, that is why this kind of prosaic explanation always fits. They're nuts, and people just see that as somebody's unbalanced. Well, what's new? We know that this happens to people. People do all sorts of things, including cutting themselves and mutilating themselves and so on. But I would challenge you to consider what makes a person hurt themselves directly in such a weird, tragic way. They're told to do it.
Yes.
By something inside them, often with a promise of a reward, or false thinking to delude them that they're going to get something beneficial out of the self-mutilation.
Yes, and the term false thinking, I think, is critical here, Carl. You may not be able to turn off the voices you're hearing in your head, but this is where, the words of Christ, I'll pull them in here, by their fruits ye shall know them, okay? I don't care who's telling you to kill. If it's voices in your head or somebody outside of yourself, you got to know deep within the consciousness of your soul that it's wrong.
Yes. And you have to also factor in, this is done with lots of people, and probably only a proportion actually carry out the act. And the others falter. They have reservations. They have enough spirituality left within them that they have second thoughts or misgivings, and then they chicken out, or they decide not to go through with it after all. And maybe they just end up unhappy and grumpy and maybe irritable and nasty to be around, but not necessarily ready to kill others. And so this we're seeing the successful ones, the ones that are manipulated to that severe extent where they go through and commit the crime.
Successful on the part of the manipulators. unsuccessful in terms of having stood strong, though. These people ultimately failed to stand strong against that kind of manipulation.
Yeah.
And that's a tragic. We don't want to hold their feet to the fire and blame them. They're victims too. But we have, also, I think, communicate the message to people that standing strong in this world is a requirement, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's not easy. And that's why almost everyone is manipulated. And their thinking is a little bit off about many, many subjects. And we'll be talking about these things in the course of this program because it influences all of our institutions in negative ways. And we just accept that as the way the world is. And it's getting better, we think, and, we're working on it. And meanwhile, there's gridlock in our political system, very little progress. In fact, it may be retrograde in many respects. And so there's many ways to slice and dice this and serve it up in bite-sized chunks. But this is a critical demonstration of what is possible with mind manipulation.
Yes. Well, we have the Lightwork Healing Protocol, Carl, to really help in these situations. Sometimes the protocol can actually eliminate these voices altogether if caught in time.
Yes.
There's many factors involved, but this is a powerful healing tool.
And we've been told this is the answer. There are other ways to reach the deep level of the mind through channeling and then to do trauma resolution. And that can undo the predisposing factors that make people violence prone and vulnerable to manipulation of this kind. And it's a way to bring them back into alignment. Indeed. And I've worked on many people with this sort of approach, but very few could do it. It requires advanced psychic ability. So this is a limitation at the moment. But the divine realm can do it the hard way and the longer way of working from the edges in towards the middle. And you need to get it started, though.
Yeah. Well, we're up on a break, Carl. Coming back in the next segment, we're going to talk about manipulation of public perceptions and healing disturbed. Be right back. Back for the final segment of Get Wisdom. We're talking about mass shootings. Go ahead, Carl.
Well, we're going to give you some more examples of tragic events, sadly, and some of the bizarre things that happen and the phenomena surrounding them and subsequently that are kind of revealing about the orchestration aspect and the manipulation of the massive humanity alongside this. So in addition to the perpetrator, the public is also being manipulated and duped about motive and about the interpretation.
We're going to talk about this.
We're going to talk about one of the tragic school shootings. And why don't you give the background, and then I'll make a comment before we launch into the channeling.
Sounds good. The Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting occurred in 2012 in Newtown, Connecticut, when 20-year-old Adam Lanza shot and killed 26 people, including 20 children between 6 and 7 years old, and 6 adult staff members. Before driving to the school, he shot and killed his mother at their Newtown house. As first responders arrived at the school, Lanza committed suicide by shooting himself.
All right, and this is another mass shooter for whom I did a spirit rescue. He became an earthbound spirit. I checked on him and saw he was still earthbound, tumbling in the dark, and effected a spirit rescue for him through the divine realm. And when I witnessed his ascension to the light, I was very struck by the fact this whole group of children came to escort him. This is one of the steps of the process, to bring someone from the light who the person will recognize, to greet them, encourage them, and escort them. And there were a few adults, but this whole group of kids. And I was, wondering, what has that got to do with this? And I was told it was his victims.
Wow. Even
though they were newly dead, they came back to help raise him up. Amazing. This is what light beings do. This is who we really are.
Right.
We understand this is victimization all the way around, victim and perpetrator both.
So this next question is interesting. I'll just give a little background. The Sandy Hook is highly controversial because there's been a number of pundits out there saying that it was fake, that it didn't happen, it was a false flag by the government. Alex Jones basically lost his public platform for the most part, spreading the story around. So this is important stuff. You asked the question of creator, what is behind the stories of the school shooting at Sandy Hook being faked?
And creator told me the stories about the killing in the school in Sandy Hook being faked are themselves faked. This is disinformation to discredit whistleblowers and to undermine their efforts to find the truth. You have been involved with this personally in rescuing the offender, and you saw his karmic history. You were able to see the predisposing factors, and in witnessing his ascension to the light, we're truly witnessing a magnificent gesture of healing and forgiveness by his actual victims. This is the glory of the divine on display and the best of divine human in action. This is not in celebration of his dastardly deed. It is in celebration of the cause of love and its presence within all divine humans who have not been hugely corrupted to close off their love line, so to speak. It is the most horrible of tragedies and leads to terrible consequences. Sandy Hook took place exactly as described in the news, and the repeated attempts to find flaws in the official story are being ginned up by the mind control brigade to sow doubts and fears and create confusion and consternation about the authorities. And many wild claims are being made that are illogical on their face. This will continue to plague you, as it is very hard for people to understand how this can be. But it can be an important part of the message and teaching opportunity as well, that all humans are being manipulated every day to believe or disbelieve many, many things. And this is always in service to the darkness.
A lot of important issues here, but I think one of the most important is to point out that even though the children of light beings came to bring him into the light, that he still has karma that he's going to have to deal with in the future. So it's not like he's completely forgiven for what he's done.
That's right, including killing these latest victims. And there'll be a time and a place, and that will come back around to him. Karma will bring it to him, the law of karma, and he'll have to make restitution. Hopefully, he'll be a healer and a helper in his next life and not another perpetrator. This is the problem. People get stuck in that mode, and maybe in a series of lives, and the pile of grief builds up, and the tragedy, and the propensity to re-offend. And that's how some of these people come to do what they do.
Indeed. And the thing about karma itself is, I like to call it rhymes with trauma. The fuel behind a lot of karma is the built-up trauma, and that persists indefinitely until it's healed.
Yes.
All right, let's move on to the next question. What is the true cause of the behavior leading to the recent arrest of a school protection officer a year following the school shooting in Parkland, Florida? The Department of Law Enforcement said its inquiry showed that he did not investigate the source of the gunshots, retreated during the shooting while victims were still under attack, and directed other law enforcement officers to remain 500 feet from the building. Was he in the grip of mind control manipulation to worsen the outcome of the crime underway?
All right, and this is Creator's answer. This is indeed what took place. This hapless individual was manipulated through mind control to stand down, in effect, and further compound the problem by warning others away from the building when their presence was sorely needed to overwhelm the school shooter and stop the carnage in process. As you know, this is standard operating procedure for all tragedies of this kind, that the orchestration goes beyond the perpetrator to others in the vicinity, and especially to first responders, to make them complacent, to cause delays, to create confusion so they work at cross purposes, or not carry out a useful role at all, thinking their help is no longer needed and someone else is taking care of it, and so forth. There are many ways to make this happen by controlling those who give the orders in particular. In this case, this school protection officer was tasked to take it upon himself to direct first responders at the scene, and in a state of confusion themselves, acceded to someone seemingly in charge. And this further contributed to the death toll on that tragic day. This is not the fault of the individual. It is very much the case. He is as much a victim as others who were a witness to the tragedy or affected in some way. All of humanity suffers when such things happen.
I think an interesting takeaway from this answer is the fact that Creator seems to be suggesting that, using violence to stop somebody in the middle of that kind of mayhem can be called for at times.
Yes, it's absolutely true. We are allowed to defend ourselves when push comes to shove. And this is, part of our world. So we have to adapt accordingly. Yes. Not to use violence as a primary strategy always, because that leads to more. But when it's forced on us, we have the right to fight back.
And indeed, if we don't, we might incur some negative karma as a result if we're in a position to stop something like that, and we choose not to.
Absolutely. And fortunately, there is an answer for all this.
Yes. And we're going to talk about it right now. Carl, you asked Creator, or actually a light worker healing protocol practitioner asked Creator, I have to share with you that I did the LHP for an individual with psychosis who was going to be placed on a community treatment order, meaning he no longer had the right to decide for himself regarding meds and money. After I did the LHP, he was taken off the schizophrenia medication because of side effects and declared as a mystery client because he no longer met the criteria for schizophrenia. I tried to create a connection with him, but he did not come back to counseling. I'm wondering if the LHP was instrumental in releasing him from the hospital and from the community order as well as from the diagnosis of schizophrenia. What can we tell her?
And Creator said, all of the beneficial things that happened in this case were attributable to the work you did with the Lightworker Healing Protocol. He was exhibiting psychotic behavior because of the manipulation of the dark spirits within him. When this was removed by your Lightworker Healing Protocol session, his symptoms resolved dramatically. He had long-standing manipulation sufficient to cause many alterations in his perspective and his emotional state as well. His description of paranormal experiences was quite real because he was one of the individuals in that percentage of people who are enticed out of the body on a nightly basis and then manipulated in the lower astral plane by the dark spirits to torment and torture them. This was a powerful negative influence that was beginning to shatter him emotionally to a point where he might become permanently psychotic to such a degree it would be quite a healing project to undo. This is not to say he's a happy-go-lucky human and normal in all respects, but the changes have been dramatic enough to allow him to function significantly better, and that is the reason he feels secure and not seeking follow-up help. The other deterrent was his former treatment by the health officials, who were completely insensitive to his accurate reporting of his life experience and what his mind was doing and saying to him, which was at odds with the psychiatric characterization of it being delusional. He was describing his reality quite well. It was simply falling on deaf ears through ignorance. This he could see and made him quite cynical about the caregivers altogether. You have been of significant help to him, and this is a blessing indeed.
It's interesting, the way you talk about caregivers just dismissing the phenomena. Rather than dismissing the phenomena, it's one thing to say, I don't know if those voices are real or not, but again, look at what they're saying, and then maybe push back on that. It's like, the voices are telling you to kill. Stop and ask yourself, does this make even sense? Draw out the client and engage with them and get them to look at the phenomena they're facing. But dismissing it wholesale, that's not helpful.
Well, the basic problem is the inner programming done by this outside consciousness.
Yes, and it's affecting both parties.
So the first order of business has to be removing those interlopers.
Yes.
Because otherwise, you won't get anywhere through reason.
Yes.
And this is the nub of the problem. Right. It's a corruption, and it's sinister, and it's diabolical, and it's invisible and unappreciated. So there's no hope for people until there is a spirit removal effort underway by many individuals through this protocol, ideally, because that's the most effective tool there is. It does healing for the spirits and gets them back to the light, so they don't just get pulled out and then return. And
it's important to point out that we are facilitating the healing, but we're not necessarily doing the lion's share of it. It's the divine coming in to remove these interlopers. Some of these interlopers are much more powerful than people, really understand. And if you try to engage them with your own power, you may find yourself in deep trouble. You should do this through the divine, with the divine tool given to us. Absolutely. And that's what gives this Lightworker Healing Protocol its power. It's a series of informed high-level prayer requests for all sources of difficulty that humans can encounter. And it works across time domains and is extremely comprehensive and thorough. And that is why it works as well as it does. It can chip away at mental illness, but it can take years. It's easier to prevent things than to fix them once the damage is done to the person. Absolutely. And that's true in the physical sense all the time, you see. An accident takes maybe a few seconds to come about, but it can leave someone with a lifelong impairment, or years of therapy, physical therapy, emotional support, and so on and so forth. So this is no different in dealing with the spiritual issues. They have a reality and a force that comes to bear on our physical existence. Exactly. And it needs this high-level attention. Well, Carl, we're out of time. Be sure to join us again next week for some more divine wisdom. Thanks for attending. Thanks.